It is my great pleasure tonight or this afternoon to have these three individuals who are going to explain this wonderful work of art that has appeared outside the front door of the Burke Museum. First, I would like to introduce Katie Bunn-Marcuse. She is our beloved curator of Northwest Native Art. She's also the director of the Bill Holmes Center. And if that's not enough, she's also an assistant professor in the department in art history here at the University of Washington. Katie works with many contemporary Native artists, and she helps them connect with the Burke collections so that they can be inspired and do research and healing. And it is a very special treat at this moment to also have the artists Tony Johnson and Adam McIsaac with us. Tony is an artist and the chairman of the Chinook tribe, so we are honored tonight. He is also a Chinook language teacher and the education director of the neighboring Shoalwater Bay tribe. Adam is the son of a fisheries biologist and grew up appreciating the beauty and diversity of the Pacific Northwest. Adam trained with world-renowned Northwest Coast Native artist Dwayne Pascoe, and he currently teaches carving to Native youth at the Confederate Tribes of the Grand Ronde Reservation, that's in Oregon. And I look forward to hearing from all three of these incredible individuals and learning more about this amazing sculpture that has appeared outside the Burke. So with that, I'm going to give you, I think Katie is going to start it off.
Well, thank you, Julie. That's wonderful. I appreciate your warm words. And yes, I'm Katie Bunn-Marcuse, and I'm a settler scholar who lives here in Coast Salish territory. And it's just a wonderful honor to get to work with all of the contemporary artists as well as the historical collections of the Burke. And I can't tell you all how excited I am tonight or today to have Tony and Adam here, but more so even to have their permanent paddle installation Guests of the Great River at the Burke every day. So we don't get to walk by it, not all of us every day right now, but we will for decades to come. And it's such a dynamic piece, and we'll talk more about all of those descriptions, but I thought we could start just with, I don't know if Tony and Adam, if you just have a few words you wanted to say before we started.
Well, actually, you know, out the news kabugu can say Chinook wawa, Nika tiki wawa slachawium, he can see slustum dem Nika, but Nestlet Kanamax kabamasaga hookson. Just really saying that I thought I ought to say something in this language of mine, and really just saying a greeting and how pleased I am to be able to be here with everybody tonight.
Thank you very much for having me here today as well. Look forward to hearing what everyone has to say, everybody's thoughts, and yeah, just really excited about the project as a whole. I'm pretty short and sweet there. So.
Okay, well, I hope that we can just have a really casual conversation with all of us jumping in from time to time. I thought that I might share my screen a little bit, and we'll have some images that we can look at. And let me get this started here. Now I think everybody hopefully is looking at the beautiful picture of Guests of the Great River. So this was a process that came together with the Burke Museum and Arts Washington, which is many of you have known for years. There's been the 0.5% or 1% for art out of construction budgets. And so this piece is part of the Arts Washington collection. And we were really just so pleased with Tony and Adam's proposal for this piece. And I think it's just incredibly important because a lot of people are very familiar with art of the Northwest Coast that is totem poles and big house screens and the form line design from the Northern Coast. But the art from the Columbia River looks quite different, you know, and I'm sure Tony will tell us a little bit more about it, but there's lots of things that were shared by these cultures all along the coast. And then there's lots of incredibly distinct things, just like the languages are so distinct from each other. But I think it's incredibly important. The Columbia River was such a gathering place and had such influence all across the coast. And so it's really important to recognize that heritage. And it really has been marginalized in public artwork and in the historical record. And so it's wonderful to be able to recognize that in this permanent piece of public artwork. And so I thought we might actually start, since this maybe isn't such a familiar topic for everybody, with a little bit of background on Columbia River arts. And there's a wonderful essay that we could share with anybody that Tony and Adam and others worked on about Columbia River art. And but we'll look at a few pictures and then we can move into this great contemporary installation. So, first we of course have our two great artists who are here. I'm so glad they're both here with us today and can talk about the process that went into making these wonderful bronze canoe paddles. But just for a little bit of background, we're going to look at some of the pieces that let us understand how this looks. And when you come to the Burke and you look at the paddles up close, you're going to see designs and patterns and faces that perhaps are unlike things that you're used to seeing on the Northwest coast, but have such strength and beauty. So do you want to start here maybe, Tony?
Sure. And, you know, I mean, there's so much to say. And, you know, so the reference to things, I mean, the sort of distinct nature of Chinook art, something I might say is I think that, you know, there's kind of a center point of that along the lower Columbia River, but there's definitely ripples of this style of art. I mean, meaning it affects our neighbors, or our neighbors were just participating in a really similar style of art. So our Salish neighbors to the north, the Chehalis, the, Cowlitz, Quinault, and others, South Puget Sound, I mean, Skokomish, and that neighborhood, and then going south into the Willamette Valley, the Kalapuya folks, and I'll even go over to the, you know, east of the mountains, our Ichishkin-Sinuit or Sahaptin speaking relatives. You know, this art, even as far as like Umatilla, or, you know, there's an influence or a relationship in this art. And
well, I'm wondering maybe, and hopefully Tony will come back in a minute, but Adam, I wonder if you wanted to just say a little bit about how these pieces look and some of the ways that those motifs get handed down over generations. Well, I'm wondering maybe, and hopefully Tony will come back in a minute, but Adam, I wonder if you wanted to just say a little bit about how these pieces look and some of the ways that those motifs get handed down over generations.
Oh, that's my worst nightmare here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So talk a little bit about the historical art is what you're asking, Katie, and where it originated from, or how it gets handed down was one of the questions.
Or just a little bit, just some descriptions of, you know, what are we looking at here?
Well, the two images that you have here, on the one on the right is a Columbia River style sheep horn bowl or ladle, and there was a very interesting method behind producing these sheep horn ladles that were used and created along the Columbia River. The Columbia River used to have quite a population of the California bighorn sheep, and so we see a lot of their art being rendered in ladles and in bowls. There's also a lot of bowls that were out there, and you know, the image on the left is a classic style Columbia River image canoe. In Lewis and Clark's journals, they talked a lot about these canoes that were decorated with anthropomorphic and zoomorphic images that would be standing up on the bow and on the stern. I think these image canoes are pretty indicative to the Columbia River. I know we've seen some northern style canoes with carvings on the gunnels and the sterns and things and the prows, and these are quite unique, I've always thought of.
And certainly this style of canoe is very unique, right, to the Columbia River. Thinking about those shapes, you know, one of the things about that ladle that we're looking at is the pierced shapes, the kind of negative spaces that are being made there. Those are really important to this style of art, and something that a lot of people miss along the way when trying to reproduce or make it. And so you might see that in some other examples as we go, but seems worth saying. I want to just acknowledge one thing too, which is that canoe model, I have every reason to believe was made by one of my wife's relatives, who is a Clatsop man. She's Clatsop, primarily Clatsop by her bloodlines. And anyway, it's just really an exceptional thing. And these, I mean, these are classic bags east of our territory, my territory. So I'm at the mouth of the Columbia River. My Chinook community represents 5 tribes, which are 2 in Oregon, the Clatsop and Kathryn, and 3 in Washington, the Lower Chinook, the Wakayakum, and the Willapa. And these bags are from the extreme other side of Chinookan territory. So we're the westernmost Chinookan speaking folks. And the people that made these bags are the easternmost Chinookan speaking people. Our languages are closely related and share a lot of attributes, but these bags are just patently from that country, meaning Wasco, Wishkam, that territory.
Nice. It's wonderful to hear a little bit more about what that geographic spread is and the variations in materials and forms.
So worth saying, you know, worth saying is that's from the Celilo Falls area. So nice. If you think about the lower Columbia River, those folks, the eastern boundary of the Chinookan speaking world is there around Celilo.
Mm-hmm. So we have here a couple of pieces, both the older and the newer, and you really see that connection in the shape of the human form and the face, the ribs.
Yeah. Very, I mean, what I want to say, I think, is that piece on the right was the first collaboration that Adam and I did together. It's for Plank House that was built on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Refuge in Ridgefield, Washington. It's commemorating a village, a substantial Chinookan community that lived there at the mouth of Lake River called Goslaput. But people say Kaslapoodle, and this is the final of the support posts in the house. And you know, something that I really do want to talk about is, you know, we're compelled to kind of talk about cultural attributes and the teachings associated with stories and that in the art that we do. In this case, we were really telling a story with the house posts about the kind of division of labor and status in a home. So our house has actually had that type of division where the back of the house, which is where this post is located, was the highest ranking area. And so that's what this is. That's why it's the most kind of highly decorated image. It shows reference to his kind of really significant spirit power. He's wearing high class things. He's has a particularly, you know, important knife. And so, you know, that kind of storytelling in our work is really important. And for what it's worth, even the way that our home sat within a village had rank. So there's more to say about that. But yes, you can see the relationships. It's a sheephorn bowl on the left that has roots further east. but again, you see the relationships of these designs, and I don't know that we can entirely go through all the details of kind of what, you know, what truly makes this art in terms of its forms, but I would say we like to use the word organic geometry, hey? So organic geometry, meaning that it's really something you couldn't exactly draw with a ruler or something that's wholly just straight edged, but there are a lot of geometric shapes involved in this art form, and maybe leave it at that.
But I really appreciate you just giving everybody, I wanted to, I know these images kind of come from a very wide geographic area, and that we're not drilling down specifically on Chinookan pieces and everyone, but I just thought it was important for us to see some of the historical images from the wider region. And now I really just want to jump into the great piece that you did for the Burke. And so I wonder if we could start with sort of talking through the process, or we could start with maybe what you were envisioning when you decided to apply for this commission for this big piece of monumental public art in Seattle at the Burke.
Adam may say something to this too, but I think, you know, both he and I were obviously really excited about the opportunity. You know, the Burke has real status amongst, you know, people that are practitioners of or studiers of Northwest Coast art. There's a very exceptional collection of Chinookan material there. But we also know the inspiration, I mean, that's come from that collection and from the folks that have worked and been, you know, kind of taught through genealogies of people associated with the Burke. So, of course, I'm acknowledging Bill, Masi Paskanek to Micah Monk. I mean, but, you know, there's, you know, then in thinking about Bill, there's all the folks he's taught, obviously. There's, you know, Steve Brown, and you know, I've had the good fortune of working with Steve. Marv Oliver's my dad's cousin. And, you know, I worked with Marv, and bottom line, I mean, you know, I guess I'll just say the same connections to Dwayne and Adam's work with Dwayne. And, you know, there's just a lot of connections to the Burke that are important to a lot of folks. And so for us, the opportunity to potentially do a piece, especially a significant piece like this, was one that we took really serious, and we're thrilled to be able to be finalists for, and then ultimately be chosen to produce. Just one other thing maybe is we haven't really described, and maybe Katie, if you have another time you wanted to do it, holler at me, but you know what the piece is about. I think people, I'm assuming everybody on the call knows enough about canoes and kind of contemporary canoe culture, and the fact that, you know, lifting up or raising up your paddles in this way in a canoe is, you know, it has different nuances depending who you're talking about. Are you losing me?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Tony,
So,
let me, can I just interrupt real quick, Tony, before we start describing it? And
please. Yeah.
you know, one of the, you had asked, I would just say one of the exciting things for me to have this installation at the Burke was that it would be validating to the art form in itself. For so many years, Tony and I have fought to bring this Columbia River art style back to the forefront of local communities, and to actually, you know, breathe life into this art form that has kind of laid dormant for so long. For so many years, we would go into these public art proposals with selection committees, and we would have selection committee members say, you know, this art that you're producing, it doesn't belong here. It was never here. It's not a totem pole. This looks like something from Easter Island. You know, it's an ancient art form, yes, but I think to be received by the Burke Museum kind of validates it as actually being an art form that not only existed here for hundreds or thousands of years, but it's still being practiced today and still belongs in the forefront of local communities, you know. And so that was really exciting to have the Burke say, yeah, we want Columbia River art here at the Burke Museum. So I just kind of wanted to throw that in there. That was
Yeah, no,
there's
truly. And it's a
lots of
part of, go
lots
ahead.
of reasons to be excited, but for me that was probably one of the most exciting points in Tony and I's career. I mean, we've talked about the Burke Museum, like he was saying, like all the artists, and I can remember going to the Burke when I was 18 years old or 19 years old, and Dwayne would say, go down there and study this mask or study that mask, and I would go in and look at all the art and someday dream of, you know, having a piece at the Burke. Started early on, and then before I even had thought about Columbia River art. And so it's just yeah, I could ramble too long about that, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think you can see, I mean, there's something to say or a story to be told about the kind of progression of the revitalization of Northwest Coast art. So, you know, Northern Form line had its, you know, moment of real focus and revitalization. And you've all seen or been living, you know, revitalization of the Coast Salish art. And, you know, I'll say since that's been heading south, you know, this is kind of a moment of being able to validate and really put energy into the revitalization of the Chinook art form that, you know, borders that Salish style that folks have become in more recent years so familiar with. And but really what the installation is about is a Chinook canoe arriving at the Burke Museum. And, you know, when we arrive on somebody else's beach, we will come around, we'll put up our paddles. It shows that we're arriving in a good way. We will put the nose of our canoe on their beach, and that's a really defenseless position. Our teaching is that, you know, like if you saw a canoe on our territory's beach or beaches, and that canoe was positioned with its bow towards the water, and you didn't know who it was, whose canoe it was, you could start to assume that they had come for a bad reason. So if you're going to just show up randomly at somebody's place, if you don't see anybody on the beach, you want to put the bow of your canoe forward so you show them you're coming. You know, I mean, in other words, you can't make a quick getaway exactly. But, you know, this is really important because, again, when you arrive on somebody's beach and they're there to greet you, you give them the nose of your canoe, and it is very defenseless. And so that's really what this is about. This is a canoe arriving. It's lined up directly with the doors, the entrance of the Burke. The smaller paddles you see in the back, that's the very last one, is the skipper of the canoe in the we like the word opt seat. Opt seat means the skipper's spot. But this is a canoe that's arriving with its paddles up. It's showing its intentions are all good, and it's carrying the culture heroes of the Columbia River. So obviously we couldn't include them all, but these are characters from our econym or from our stories, from our myths. And, you know, this is what drives us in terms of our daily thinking about the world, and the way that we talk about it is, you know, the relationship to these stories and teachings. And so, you know, won't say too much about them, but, you know, there was a time when there was the animals living in our territory before there were human beings. There's a whole set of stories about that. There's another whole set of stories about when they're preparing the world for human beings. And so that time period is really, really important. Coyote made an epic journey from around Seaside, Nakotat, Seaside, Oregon, and up the seacoast and then up the Columbia River. that journey was him kind of setting things in place for human beings to be here. And then there's a whole nother set of stories that are about the human beings that were here on the ground, or that are now here on the ground. And so, you know, those teaching stories about the geography, about the way animals are, about the way that we're supposed to be together, those are really, really important. And so that's ultimately what's being reflected in the images on these paddles, is they might be a moment from a myth, but they reference all of the teaching associated with it. And it's something that Adam and I have been compelled to highlight in our art. And I guess, you know, one other thing that's really important to say is this art in its natural form is really full of monois. It's full of spirit power and spirit power references, and it's really heavy in what it is saying. Because of that, and us not wanting to bring that real heavy spiritual load to public art, we really focus on these stories. So the forms look a lot like, because that's our art, the spirit specific art of our ancestors. But our main characters, rather than being individual spirit power or those things, are typically the characters of the stories. And in some cases, we're applying a particular story to a piece of art because of the place we're putting it in. In some cases, it's like this. It's just important moments and stories that we wanted to highlight, because what we see as an opportunity here is many, many years of interpreting, talking about, and sharing these stories with the Burke's audience.
It's going to be a really great opportunity to have such a big public piece out front that people can walk through and interact with, and to have these to really raise up that education around Chinook and art. And I will mention that as I'm going to ask Tony in just a second to take us through a little bit of the process of making these, and he will share with you that it starts, of course, with these canoe paddles, the regular size, and then casting up into the larger one. And we are really hoping to bring this original set of 11 original paddles into the Burke's collection. So we'll be doing some fundraising to acquire those original paddles as well. And that will let us do education both outside in this great public courtyard forum and at a much closer, much more intimate interaction and situation with students and with the public. And we're really looking forward to having Adam and Tony come back and share with everyone. So I was wondering, do you want to just go through a little bit of the process of how it came from the conception and then the drawings into the amazing bronze paddles?
Why don't you speak to that one, Adam? You want to do that?
Yeah, you got me here?
All right, we can hear you, yes.
Yeah, okay. So I think paddles, I think one of the things that Tony kind of touched on this was the spiritual nature of the art form, and how do we go about producing it for the public to view when so much of it was made for one's own person. And so throughout our career, we've always looked at things that would have been seen in the public. For instance, in this case, canoe paddles. Everybody would have seen a canoe paddle. It wouldn't have been something that was hidden away. We've always been drawn to canoes. Some of the very first, my first interactions with Tony and his people was the first salmon ceremony and canoeing, and playing a part in that ceremony, and the salute, of course, that we talked about with the paddles up. And so I think Tony and I we always kind of bump ideas off of each other, how to go about doing this art form in a way that is appropriate. We both are drawn to canoes, and just naturally we were drawn to the paddles as well. Then it came to like, well, how are we going to render them? What are we going to do? We want to get paddles that are going to be larger than life, yet we still want them to look like paddles. And The traditional paddle wood that was used on the Columbia River is ash. It's kind of difficult to get really good Oregon ash, especially nice planks that are 11 feet tall. And so we started thinking about other means of how to take these designs that would have traditionally been carved roughly in that 6 or that 5.5 foot or 5 foot zone, bump these up to 11 or up to into 11 feet. I would have to say this, that both Tony and I were always inspired by Marvin Oliver and his innovation, and he had talked to us a lot about working in other mediums and using computers and things to get to where we want to go. And I think that we kind of just naturally gravitated towards, well, you know, maybe we could do some 3D printing, maybe we could do some enlarging. How do we go about doing this? And we actually decided that, well, let's carve these in yellow cedar because we can get some good yellow cedar. It's tight, it carves well, it'll be good for definition and rendering the designs. And we started to design and carve these paddles. I think they were all right around 6 feet tall. And there's a place in Portland that we took them to that scanned them into the computer and then blew them up and then 3D printed off of our original carvings. And so these red paddles that you see here are the 3D printed paddles in I'm not exactly sure what kind of a polymer it is, but they dip it in wax. And so these have been waxed over in this red wax, and these are getting ready to go, and they'll pull a mold off of these red ones here, and then that's kind of how you get to the bronze. The end result is the bronze paddles. I kind of lost myself in my description there. What is there anything else? Can you add to that, Tony, at all? Or
No, I think that's right. I mean, we originally had intended to carve these paddles in their full scale in foam, and the fabricator we were working with produced them in the wrong material, and so we ended up having to step back to actually go ahead and just say, hey, we're going to do it in what we're familiar with. We did it in those 6 foot paddles, and then had the 3D printing done. So then the scale of the paddles in the actual installation is 3 of them are 6 feet tall. So the actual scale of the carving themselves, 3 of them or 4 of them are 9 feet, and 4 of them are at about 12 feet. And so those were accomplished by what you saw, the red models that were 3D printed and then ultimately cast. I will tell you that I physically carved each of the paddles. I carve a lot of the paddles. I mean, the actual forms themselves before the designs were applied. I carve a lot of paddles for our canoe family, and you know, we make a lot of, I mean, it's a living thing in our community here. And it was really a dance, kind of a challenge to build paddles that were going to be big enough to fit on a stainless steel mount. It's basically a stainless steel rod that was installed into the ground that, you know, had to be engineered to be able to take the obvious abuses you might imagine that people might put on these, somebody swinging around on it, whatever it might be. So it's really not easy for us to maintain what is, you know, paddles are very fine by their nature, and they're really, you know, beautiful for how fine they can be. I mean, they're really reduced as far as they can be to be functional. And I did not want to see us, or we did not want to see us lose that. So if you look at them in person, you'll see the scale is just a little bit off from where we probably would ultimately carve a natural paddle, but we pared it down as close as we possibly could to allow for the engineering and to allow for the depth of carving on both sides. So, I mean, it just, a description of kind of a dance we had to do between form and function, I guess.
Mhm.
That's so great. I wanted to ask you, I really like that description of where you had to be to get that balance. And I had two questions, and then I hope we can have a few questions from our participants. But the first is, I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the function, how these canoe paddles look quite different from other paddles on the coast. And then I want to go back to the picture of the original installation, and you can talk a little bit about the shadows.
Yeah, so, you know, and to say it, this particular one we're looking at is of a model. I mean, this is a copy of a canoe paddle that we have in the family that I think actually is, you know, late 1700s, early 1800s, and there's a pair of them, and they're very small. They're women's paddles for, you know, there's a very small type of canoe that a woman could carry herself, kind of lake to lake or pond to pond for gathering purposes. And these paddles are from that tradition. And so these are very, very much just a copy of an old type of Chinook style paddle. Each of them, you can see there's kind of three types of paddles represented in the installation. All of them have their own history with us. But they all have similarities, right? They have this notched tip and concave handle, and that's all really typical to a Chinook style paddle, which we call Isik, by the way. Isik is the word for these kinds of paddles. It said earlier that, or I mean, you saw a slide maybe that said used for grabbing cottonwood roots, but it's really broader than that in the sense that, you know, we knew how to make, and people did make leaf-shaped paddles. I mean, the kind of classic Northwest Coast paddle people think about with a point on it. But a lot of our territory is in really ripping tidewater where there's a lot of exchange. It's shallow. It has, you know, a lot of islands, a lot of reasons to be able to get a hold of the surface underwater, you know, to actually grab the bottom. And so a single point paddle could never, right, grab a rock or a root or whatever. These, though, are just built for that. I mean, that's really the main thing they're doing, and it's in all kinds of different circumstances. Most of these are sharpened in one way or another. So that paddle on the left, you see how it's sharpened. That set of paddles, the two that I was talking about, they are incredibly sharp, and Oregon ash holds an edge really nice. And so those were used by the women that owned those paddles to be able to cut their cattail roots or to loosen the ground around Wapato or whatever it was. And so they really are also a, you know, harvesting tool, what have you. Interestingly, we believe that our paddles should never touch, the tip should never touch the ground of the outside the water. It's kind of a taboo for them to be on the ground. On the other hand, they're absolutely made to be on the bottom underwater. So, and
that's great. That's such
while this one's up, the one on the left I described where that came from. The one on the right, the front four, those are a type of paddle that, you know, we had elders draw pictures of, have examples of, but there is a beautiful set of them at the Oregon Historical Society that came with the Scarborough family canoe, which is a canoe that came from the North Shore of the Columbia River, just at a place called No Smiths, just to the west of the bridge to Astoria on the North Shore. That's where that canoe came from, and the paddles that are associated with it are very much like that form. And so just thought I'd point that out.
That's great. I love hearing about the fully functional aspects of these paddles and how each different section of them really contributes to what people needed at that moment in the most efficient way possible, that you could have all this in one form. I wondered if I could put up this photograph if you wanted to talk just a little bit about one of my favorite aspects of this as a piece of public art is that it is so, it's so fully immersive that you can walk through it, and it changes over the course of the day as you sort of see the light move around. And maybe you could point out to people a little bit of what we can see in terms of the shadows here.
Well, something fun, and Adam might want to speak up, but I think that the tree to the left of this image is a Isaac stick, which is an Oregon ash tree. And so, you know, we worked to try to make that happen so that people could see the living version of this tree that makes this style of Columbia River paddle or Isaac. And so, yes, but then that's right. When Adam and I, when we had this idea, and when we were installing this installation, I think every 20 or 30 minutes, I think we stopped to just kind of say, wow, how different it was in each kind of moment of the day. But what we said in part about this is that the sun rises and those paddles reach out with their shadow, and then that shadow makes one long stroke across the surface of this plaza every day. And so just, you know, we were moved by that idea. A lot of times when we're doing art, I've done a number of canoes for folks or been involved with canoe making and never been willing to make a canoe that would be just like a museum piece. I mean, these need to be living things. And so to make something like this that has that life, or that, you know, that feels like it really is doing its job in its own way of reaching out and paddling on that plaza was really fun for us to think about. We were really excited to see that there was a, you know, little time-lapse video to show that. Well, we thought it'd be fun to have this woman as the skipper of this canoe. So she's actually the last, the final paddle in the skipper's seat, or the opt seat in the installation, is this woman. And her name is Ioi, and she's Blue Jay's older sister. And Blue Jay is one of the kind of characters in our stories who's always doing something a bit messed up or a bit out of line. But the sister of his, Ioi, is a very high-class woman who really kind of sets an example of how you're supposed to be in the world. And so it just was really fitting to me that she would be the one running the canoe up to the Burke. And so that's what's going on there. And, you know, it's probably too hard to see, but this is, again, like we were saying, they're references to certain times and parts of stories. And in this case, this is Ioi when she married a man from the land of the dead. And so on one side at the top is a stick, and on the other side is some backs of the salmon. And when Blue Jay went to visit her, he just saw sticks floating down the river and the people collecting them. This is in the land of the dead. And he thought they were so foolish, but she had been there and she knew what was happening. And she said, no, those are the salmon of this place, right? So for those people, the people that are dead, they were collecting beautiful fish. Blue Jay saw them peeling the bark off a big log on the beach, and he thought that was so foolish, but it was really that was a whale in the land of the dead. They were taking its blubber off. And so my only point is, and not trying to tell the stories out of season, just the point that, you know, that's the kind of things we're talking about as reference points that are you know, in the art that we had the good fortune of placing there.